Hello, and welcome to Creative Banter, a creativity and philosophy-focused podcast where anything goes. I'm your host, Cody Schultz. Joining me is the one and only Ben Horn. This week, we allocate most of our discussion towards zines and journals. Sparked by Ben's recent trip to the Sierra Nevada and his experiences there, we have seemingly come up with a fresh take on exploring new-to-us locations. Let's dive right into it, shall we? And we are good. If you want to start us off.
Okay. So what's going on, Cody? It's now fall, and so how are things going for you?
Really wet over on the East Coast.
Really?
Well, because of Hurricane Ian coming through.
Oh, that's right.
It's made its way up the coast. I think it's officially past us now, though. Today has been nothing but sunshine. So, and with the sun came plenty of warmth that I was not expecting.
Now, when does your area get fall color? Are you there yet, or is it still on its way, or how's that work out?
It's trying its best. We've got a couple trees like on the ride to the gym that I go to or over to the college. There's some on the way that are in deep red already, and there are others that are like the ones out in front of me that are just starting to turn to that yellow.
Nice.
So I think it's going to be a very sporadic coloring, but we were saying before we start recording, I'm going up to the mountain house again this weekend for a couple of days, and I'm curious to see how the colors are up there, because not only is a lot more woodland up in that area than down here where it's a lot more farms, but there's always a pretty drastic difference, even with it being only 100 miles away, just by going north. It's always quite fascinating to see. So,
Do you know the elevation of where the mountain house is compared to where you live?
let me look it up quick. Okay, so 692 feet is the elevation of where the mountain house is.
Okay.
Or at least the town that's a side of it.
Yeah.
And then we are about 410 feet.
Okay. So it's just a little bit
Yeah.
more, but certainly in a more remote area with more forests, and that's got to be cool. It'll be interesting to see what the effect is for fall color where you are with, because everything has been a bit different. Plus, you had all the recent rains and everything, and plus you mentioned it now being a bit on the warmer side. So it just, there's so many variables involved with fall color. And
yeah, everything that I've heard was that it like goes off of August primarily in terms of like the weather that you get in August, and for us it was very abnormally dry August.
Yeah.
So I have a feeling that fall color is going to come and go really fast for us.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It might surprise me and really be vibrant, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. That's why it's one of my favorite times of year, because it's different each time. And I just got back from a trip up to the Eastern Sierra, and this is the one that I mentioned last week where I was thinking about going up to the Eastern Sierra and experiencing fall color there and not bringing my camera. And I gotta say, I'm really glad I did not bring my camera, because it is a completely new location for me. Like, everything is just completely different from what I'm used to. And I think the camera would have only been a bit of a distraction. And are you familiar with the Sierra Mountains at all?
Not a ton, no. Most of like my knowledge of like out west and that kind of deal is from like Ansel Adams or William Neal or like you and Nick Carver, that kind of deal. The
Yeah.
photographers that I know out in that area, but
It's for me, it's an incredibly intimidating place because it's a vast mountain range. It starts with rolling hills on the west, and then starts really picking up the elevation as it starts heading towards the east, and then eventually you get this moonscaped high mountains with these alpine lakes, and then the far eastern side of the Sierra, that's where your tallest peaks are, and then it drops right down to a desert environment from there. And when I went to the White Mountains, because the White Mountains are one mountain range to the east of the Sierra Nevada, and at sunset, as I'm sitting at my campsite at the White Mountains, I'm looking across the valley towards the Sierra Nevada, and you just have this from as far as you can see to the north to as far as you can see to the south, you see this long line of jagged peaks. I mean, it's incredibly intimidating. And you had mentioned, Ansel Adams, William Neal, all these people who have built their careers upon, photographing in the Sierra. And I honestly, I had avoided it just because I know it takes a long time to get used to a location. And I finally had the opportunity where I knew that fall color was pretty decent. And so I drove to the Eastern Sierra, which is where you have some of the highest peaks. And then you drive up from the Owens Valley, from, Bishop, California. I drove up Bishop Creek. And then you rise in elevation pretty quickly. And the campground I stayed at was right around 9,000 feet or so.
Oh, wow.
So it's a bit of a climb to get there. But then you're looking up at peaks, and some of them are like 14,000 feet. And it was really fascinating going there without the camera because I had no distractions. The campground I was staying in was in a grove of aspen trees that were all like perfect fall color. And there was beauty all around me, and it was situated in this deep canyon. And so the canyon was kind of the closed end of the canyon was sort of facing a little bit towards the south, and then the open end that leads toward the town and lower elevation and stuff was a bit towards the north. So you had the sun that crosses kind of across the canyon over the course of the day. And I went there realizing that I'm not going to know when the light is going to be best. I'm not going to know when to photograph or how to photograph these beautiful stands of aspen trees. So I just want to observe it. And I got to say, it was probably one of the better experiences I could have had. And so I brought a notebook, a journal with me. And each day I would kind of write in the journal some of my thoughts and observations. And it really helped to slow me down and just to really observe everything around me. And I only was there for two nights, but I went on, I'm still pretty sore right now from a hike that I went on. This will be 2 days ago now from the time that we're recording this, where I went to, there was a trailhead that was at about 9,800 foot elevation. And then I climbed up to a mountain pass that was at about 12,000 foot elevation. And it was about 13 miles of hiking to get to that pass and back. But it was a really rewarding experience. Not even being distracted by my camera and just taking everything in. And so I'm really glad I did that. I know in the past I've talked about the whole first day funk thing that I get when I go on the trips. There was none of that. There was none of that at all. And so I found that to be a little bit interesting as well. And I think the fact that I was there during fall color and the fact that I was seeing things in the sort of the best possible conditions with good light and everything it was just it was a really nice experience. There was no mosquitoes. Campsites are readily available. I could have brought my kayak and gone kayaking on some of the lakes there. And so I think that will be a very good way of getting more familiar with that area and starting to do a little bit more work there as well. And then also I had mentioned to my wife when I got back that, that'll be like a perfect time of the year for her and I to go on a fall camping trip and, just, avoiding the summer crowds and everything that goes along with that. So it worked out really well. And it was also a nice little trial run for bringing along the journal, because I know that we've talked about in the past several episodes doing zines and stuff along those lines. And so I figured I would just start writing in the journal and just to get a feel for it. And that way, when I end up doing the zines for next year, I'll have a good feeling for how that process will be and how much I need to write and how to display that in a zine and everything along those lines. But highly recommended not taking a camera, going somewhere beautiful. And it was also a great way of not having my camera being eaten by a bear. So there's that.
Yeah, as if we need to bring that back up again. Thanks.
Yes. And man, stuff like that makes for great stories after the fact. Not
Oh, it does.
The moment, terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. And that's the other thing too. I'm not accustomed to hiking in bear country, but I found myself completely at ease. Like there was like zero. It felt like a very familiar environment, even though I've never been there before. And for me, that is saying something, because any new place for me is incredibly overwhelming. But there's something about this place that I see why people are so in love with it. It was a very fantastic experience.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing with bear country, at least when it comes to like black bears, from the limited knowledge that I have, they don't want to mess with you. No animal really wants to be bothered by you or anything. I mean, the ones that do are the ones that are used to human interaction and used to being fed from humans, because we're not the most intelligent creatures at times.
Yeah.
I mean, even thinking about like around here and like the property, that there are bears around there. Like we have black bear everywhere that I hike.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just a matter of you never see them, because they don't want to see you, and you don't really want to see them most times.
Yeah, they're just in it for the food.
I mean, even up in the property, the only time that I saw one was once, and that was 2 or 3 years ago now. Mm-hmm. And it was just a mama and her cub that just so happened to be passing by. And past that, we've had maybe 2 or 3 that have been up there when I wasn't up there to witness it, but
mm-hmm.
Still, they just roam around, they walk through, and they're like, all right, we're done with this, because there's nothing here for us, really.
Yeah. The other thing too is in past several episodes I'd mentioned the whole like breathing through my nose and stuff, and I was doing that when I went on that long hike, and it definitely gets challenging as I start when I start getting up to that pass at about 12,000 feet. Definitely slows me down a little bit. Definitely a bit of a challenge. But the other thing that I discovered as something amazing on this trip is when I went to the store to pick up a few supplies before heading out on this trip. I usually pick up some peanut butter, some jelly, some sourdough bread, just for quick camping lunches. And I saw that they had peanut butter in like a little squeezy pouch. I'm like, I need this in my life. And oh man, that is like the best thing. I just would have it in my pack, and then you just squeeze it right in your mouth, and just like calorie dense food. And the reason I mention this is that I found that as I was hiking up there, I'm just breathing through my nose and just going along and everything's fine. And I realized at a certain point that I could just pack my mouth full of peanut butter. I could just be hiking along, enjoying that peanut butter. And, it's just like having this nice reserve of a tasty little snack ready to go. But I'm just picturing what's going to happen at some point as I'm hiking along the trail and there's a bear that gets a little whiff of that peanut butter. And then I'm sitting there with my mouth just filled with peanut butter. And I'm just going, I just pictured it being a very bad situation. But
I could just picture
convenient.
you. I could picture you and the bear sitting next to each other. You squeezing some in your mouth, next some in the bear's mouth, just going back and forth.
Yeah,
Then the
sitting
bear
on a
getting
log.
irritated because you ran out.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see
Do you
that.
plan on adding Sierra Nevada to your regular round of yearly trips, like from a photographic aspect, or is it going to kind of be like how the Redwoods was, where you went once or so and kind of dissipated a little bit?
I definitely think it's going to become a regular part of it. And part of it's because of the timing. I went there on the 3rd of October, and it was basically peak color for a lot of the areas at that elevation. And then the peak color starts working its way lower in elevation, and the creek keeps going and going. So there's going to be stuff to shoot for a long time. But, I mean, it was absolutely beautiful that time of year. And you consider that is roughly 2 weeks before when the color starts looking pretty good in Zion. So it's easy enough to do 2 trips and have, a nice kind of break in between. So I don't know that it's going to be a location that I will film video at, because I'm a little hesitant filming video at a location I don't know that well, because if there's certain areas that are more sensitive, if there are certain things along those lines, I don't want to start, filming video in an area and then realize that, I'm having an impact on that particular area or stuff along those lines. So I don't know that I'll do video there until I really get familiar with the area. But definitely, I think I will return next year. And I took tons of scouting photos on my iPhone, and I have a pretty good feeling for the sort of themes to pursue on future trips in terms of what looks good, what the best sort of light for the aspens, and just getting a general feel for that. It also occurred to me as I was going on one of the hikes that I know nothing about the various plants that are there, which is something we had talked about in past episodes, where once you learn to recognize the different plants and know the species, it really, I think, helps have a deeper connection with the location. And so I realized that I'm going to need to know like the different types of pine trees and the different types of plants and stuff, just because for me that helps out a lot to gain that level of familiarity with the location.
I think it would be absolutely fascinating. Instead of if you would have one trip, so say that it's this area because you don't know it very well, where instead of bringing the video kit with, you just do your photography, but then you integrate that the zine journalistic kind of concept to it.
Yeah.
So kind of like a when you go to a new location, almost to have a journal that you take with you, that you write in as you're taking photographs, or if you find new plants that you don't know about, just a whole, as if you're the first person there discovering everything and documenting that. I think that could be a really cool thing to, even if it was just for yourself, but especially to offer in replace of the videos themselves for that one location. So each year that you go there, you could produce a small zine of your collection of discovery, and then offer that as a whole collection over the years, where people can start collecting them and be like, okay, this is Ben's journey year over year as he gets more intimate, and this is the transgression of your photographs and how they change from okay, this is the first year that I went with a camera, and I wasn't intimate with the place. I didn't know it that well. And this is the 10th year with a camera where, okay, now I'm really starting to get into the groove. Like, I know this place pretty well. I can learn the lighting better. I can plan my compositions better. I know X, Y, and Z a lot more intimately. I think that would be a really cool idea and a long-term project, even if it would be something that you would keep to yourself as a big journal.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that idea. And actually the fact that I was keeping the journal on this trip is great, because it would really just share the first reactions, initial impressions. And I guess in some ways a bit like when I do the film reveal videos, where it's just trying to capture that first thing, but doing more so in the field. Because I think when a person is, writing in a journal, they're going to be a lot more honest than if it's through video.
Yeah.
Video it's just a different sort of
It's
experience.
not scripted when it's in a journal.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's almost as though if a person's writing in a journal, it's not intended to be read. It's just putting your thoughts out there. Versus with video, there's just a whole different aspect to it, where it's, as much as I am completely myself for the videos, it's a whole different situation with, writing in a journal. So yeah, I think that's good. I think this is perhaps the start of a project, and I have the first couple pages already done. And I'll also say that it felt very therapeutic to write in the journal, because it forced me to sit down, to relax, and to just take in my surroundings in a way that I'm typically on my feet all day long, just wandering around. And I think perhaps writing in the journal was the reason I didn't have that first day funk. So I'm wondering if that's part of it. And that's definitely going to be a part of my process from here on out. When I go to Zine, I'll be doing the journal every day, and maybe throw some little sketches in there and stuff as well. And so I think that is a very important part of the process, and perhaps it's the part that I've been missing all these years.
Yeah, I keep thinking about that idea. I really do like that. I think that is even something like I've gone to Acadia once before and was supposed to this year, but I plan already on going back next year. I actually brought it up to my girlfriend. I'm like, hey, do you want to do a camping trip up there again as like one of our trips? Mm-hmm. And she was all for it. So I think doing like a discovery of place Acadia kind of journal would be really cool. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think it's really it's not something I've seen done very much. And probably because a lot of things that are going to be more popular are going to be the things that are going to attract a lot of eyes in terms of like, I don't know, like YouTube stuff or blog entries or whatever. And this is a whole different category of something that really is something to be consumed very slowly. And I can imagine, flipping through a zine or something of a journal of that sort and just reading the writing firsthand, and then seeing the photographs or anything else along those lines. I see that's something where you're just going to sit there and, sip a hot cup of tea or hot cup of coffee and just, take it all in, which is the opposite of everything else these days with the internet, social media, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And you could even go so far as including just not only like scans of your actual journal, but also the photographs that you took on this trip of like your scouting images, some of them, if you find any like plant that you want to identify or something, photographs of that, and your little doodles and sketches and all of that.
Yeah.
It could be a really cool, expansive project depending on how you approach it.
Yeah. And the fact that it breaks the work up into just, it takes a few minutes. It doesn't take very long to do a little journal entry for the day. But when you break all that work up into just a little bit at a time, it's far less intimidating pulling out the journal and just, scratching down some stuff, as opposed to pulling out a video kit and everything else, plus all the work on the back end.
Yeah.
So I could see that being a very rewarding long-term project. And so I think it's definitely something I'll pursue with that. The only thing I learned based on just the few little entries I did is that I will definitely need to make sure that I only write on one side of each page, because it does bleed through just a little bit.
Yeah.
And so, which, I don't know, maybe that actually isn't such a bad thing, because you have a little hint of what's coming on the next page, but I think it'll be a cleaner presentation if I just make sure I write only on one side of the page so it scans pretty nicely.
Yeah, I use every night or so, I have my own little journal that I do, and I'm using Moleskine journals, which are really high quality paper and really, really nice journals. Expensive, but still worth it, I think. But even still, whenever I'm doing them, I just write on the one side, and I leave the other side blank. And
yeah,
my girlfriend's giving me slack for that, because she's like, why are you wasting the whole side of a paper? I'm like, well, at least to me, I'm right-handed, so it's very natural for me to write on the right-hand side, whereas if I write on the left-hand side, it just feels weird.
It's awkward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing that I was thinking of is I'm just about finished going through this first journal that I have, and I might, at that point, flip it and start writing on the other sides upside down, so I'm still writing on the right-hand side and then going backwards through it. But yeah, I still worry about that bleed, if there would be any. I mean, this is all just for my own personal thing, but still, if I'd ever go back through and read it, or I would want to be able to read it as legibly as possible and not have to be confused about if this little bleed through is a whole new word or something that I completely missed, or that kind of deal. And especially if you're deciding on scanning these in for to produce a zine, that could get very tricky very quick.
What size is the journal that you're writing in?
It's maybe like 6x8, not even.
That's pretty similar to the one that I brought along on the trip, because I figured, because I'm thinking about it in terms of, how is that going? I mean, I feel like that's a pretty good size in terms of scanning them in and having it on a little bit of a larger, a page larger than that, so you have plenty of nice white space around it and such. But and also it seems like it gives me enough space in order to write a fair amount for that day. But yeah, it's also small enough size to, I could just tuck it in the behind my seat in my Forerunner, where it's sitting there waiting for me for the next day.
Yeah, I have a couple of those that size. It's like 5x8. I just measured it quick, roughly around. And I have a couple of those that I use, just that are scattered around random drawers and that kind of thing. I have one that's quite a bit smaller than that, that's almost pocket-sized, that I was using for documenting my exposure times, that kind of thing, back when I was still doing that. But in terms of writing in it, as a journal, it's far too small.
How long have you been writing in the journals?
As my daily journal?
Yeah.
I started it last June, I think.
Oh, that's cool.
Something like that, yeah. I tried it before, but
was there any reason that inspired you to start doing that again?
You always hear how beneficial it is from guys like Ryan Holiday or Austin Kleon and the likes. Even I think Sean Tucker and Jeffrey Sidoris were getting into it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I just figured maybe it'll help to at least disperse my thoughts a little bit, get pen on paper, and actually get some kind of, I guess, reassurance or something along those lines of what I'm thinking, just to get them out there, I guess is what it all comes down to.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there are days that I don't write in it, and I've gone through, like when I go down to, on my trips, I typically won't bring it with me because I have a journal that I use that's dedicated to the trips that I take with my girlfriend, as like a little daily documentation kind of thing of what we did and all that. But otherwise, I try to write in it every night or so. So yeah.
That's so cool. I mean, I've heard other people talk about the benefits of it, and I can totally see how it would be a very worthwhile thing to do, just in terms of the process of writing something out and then kind of like, just feeding that back into, I don't know, there's something about the process of it that seems like it would be quite beneficial. And I don't know if, well, that's why I'm thinking that helped me have a better experience on that trip. And the other thing too, is I think it put me in a different mindset when I was out there. Cause when I went on that really long hike, I had hiked all the way to the pass. It took me about 3 hours to get to the pass, and then it was about 2 hours hiking back. And as I started hiking back, I was trying to remember what it was I was listening to when I was hiking in. And then I realized I wasn't listening to anything at all. Because sometimes I'll have like a podcast in or something, and I had this strange feeling as I'm walking back that I was listening to something, only to realize that I think my mind was just thinking about what I was going to write in the journal about the hike I was going on. And just my mind was active in a different way. And it made me feel very at peace with my surroundings. And it was a very interesting sort of, it's tough to describe, but I think it just made me think a little bit differently about how I would describe things. And it was almost like I was having a conversation with myself in my head. And it made the time go by really, really fast. So it does seem like that gave a sense of calm that I probably wouldn't have otherwise had.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's got me thinking about my future trips too, because like the positive viewpoint that you have put on not taking your camera on a trip, that especially has me thinking about when I go to new areas next. I mean, so today I was reading one of the daily newsletters that Craig Mod has been putting out, as he is now on, I think, like a week or 2 week long walk that he's doing in Japan.
Oh, wow.
He does these quite often, and it's to collect photographs or information, or just to collect experiences for future written works and the like.
Yeah.
And just looking through this newsletter got me thinking about like the documentational aspect of, because he's using a Leica, I think he's using an M11 right now, which is like a jealousy driven thing for me, at least, because I'd love to have one.
Yeah.
But just to think of going on a hike or on an extended trip where you are just there in the moment, and to have a camera, or whether it's your phone or like point and shoot or something equivalent, something that's very quick, easy to use, you don't really have to think of anything, and then journaling as well, and putting that all together, and whether you send it out like Craig does in his what he calls pop-up newsletters like this, or as a zine, or something along those lines, just to it would just be interesting to experience and to see how that changes the experience as a whole for me. If it's more of a mindful, nature driven trip than what it is when you have the large format camera with you and you are thinking about compositions all the time.
Do you struggle to be in the moment when you're in the field?
I try my best not to. And I can't say that it's, I would say maybe it's like a 70-30 split. So 30% of the time I'm not in the moment.
Yeah.
And that's even with like short like day hikes and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I try. It also depends on who I'm with or what's going on like at home. So if I go out on a day hike where I drive like an hour and a half, 2 hours away, whatever it is. If I know that, say, my girlfriend is just, for some reason, she didn't go with me or she's doing something else that weekend,
Mm-hmm.
there's almost a constant need for contact of just, even if it's periodic, of, oh, do I have signal to send a quick text kind of thing.
Yeah.
And perhaps that's a generational thing because I grew up pretty much having a cell phone or close to it. I wish there was, I wish I had the, I guess, courage, so to speak, to just leave my phone in the car and not worry about it. Just phone goes in the car and I go into the woods and for a couple hours where I don't have that to sit back and rely on, where I don't have any possibility of pulling out my phone and being distracted by that so that I can be fully immersed in nature. But it's tough. It's in a world where we are constantly connected, it is really, really difficult to unplug.
So, of all the areas you go, do you typically have a cell signal in those areas?
Most of the time. There's one area that I absolutely love and I really want to start going back up there more often again, where I really don't have any cell signal, which is always nicer because I know that I don't have cell signal, so I'm not checking my phone as often.
Yeah, a lot of the areas I go, there's no cell signal. I do have a satellite messenger, which is really nice to be able to stay in contact with my wife and just to have that sort of reach out. But also, it's a little bit of it's a slower way of communicating, so it's different than having a cell signal, but it gives a bit of peace of mind. I'll say that I definitely do struggle with being in the moment when I go on the trips. I think when I'm actually shooting a photo, as I'm working on a composition, as I'm standing next to the camera waiting for the conditions, I am 100% in the moment at those times.
I definitely
just because
agree with that.
that's you just have like this single track mind. Your mind isn't going to wander. It's not going to go some weird places as you're just like, out and about in the middle of nowhere. But I'll say that the rest of the time, if I'm just out scouting around and looking for things to photograph, man, I have a tough time like being in the moment at those times. And so that's why I'll force myself just to sit down and just to like not move for a while. And that definitely helps, but it's difficult to do. But I think the journaling really just forces you to like go into a different mode, very similar mode to if I'm shooting a photo. But I think whatever process that is engaging definitely has helped me to be more in the moment. I was doing when I first got to my campsite, I was doing a journal entry, just describing what I saw around me and the towering canyon walls on either side and everything else. And there was like this butterfly floating through the air, and it had the same color in its wings as like the aspen leaves, and it was set against the blue sky, and all these things that I would have completely missed and I wouldn't have noticed if I wasn't sitting there with a pen in my hand and just writing things out. And I think there's a lot of value in that. And when you talked about how Craig Mott was doing the projects where he's going for a walk with his camera and everything. I mean, it sounds like he's taken it to the point where that's really, the camera is a part of the process, which is a whole different way of working. And it's a different way of working than I work. I can't quite work in that sense. But I see how that would lead to some really fascinating work. And I think it sounds like he has a way where it just allows him to be very much in the moment, which is something that I think is difficult for most people to do.
So I just pulled up. He has a newsletter, Ridgeline, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is his weekly newsletter that he does. But regardless, this goes back a couple of years, and he wrote up these rules of walking because of him doing so many of these walks.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to read them out because they are very simple. Like he says, you can distill all of this to walk, be present, engage with the world around you, keep an open mind. But he goes in and he says to walk whenever possible, which means avoiding transportation unless absolutely necessary, because he believes a lot of interesting things happen in the interstitial, boring areas between good and suboptimal walking spaces. And these spaces are often fast forwarded via transportation. He says no mental teleporting, so no podcasts, no social media, no news sites. Says yes, say yes to many things, yes to being present, yes to entering as many funky looking cafes, diners, barbershops as possible, yes to chatting up elderly farmers galore. With an almost religious fervency, perform the following creative acts every single day. So, take a portrait of someone before 10 a.m., film 5 minutes of nothing exciting happening somewhere along the road, record a 5-minute binaural audio snippet, publish a newsletter. And he says, finally, rules that vibrate with a quantum urgency may no longer be useful. Always be willing to break or bend them. Which, all of this is, of course, quite tied to his specific walks, where, like, you have the avoiding transportation unless absolutely necessary. Like, obviously, if you're doing a walk or a hike in the woods, you don't have really many other options for transportation. Or, like, you aren't necessarily going to be chatting up elderly farmers while in the woods.
Yeah.
Maybe around Pennsylvania, there's always a possibility, but but it's just interesting when you distill it like he did to the walk, be present, engage with the world around you, keep an open mind. And that as a whole is just really what we should be aiming for anytime that we're out in the field, whether we have a camera with us or not.
Do you have a feel whether he's an introvert or an extrovert?
I definitely get introvert vibes from him. I think in the same sense that you are introverted, where you are in the public eye for a lot of what you do, but nonetheless would much prefer to be on your own.
Yeah.
I know that he enjoys company, because I know that he back before COVID would often have friends or business partnership acquaintances, however you want to describe them, to come and stay at his house and work together on projects or whatever. So the collaboration is definitely something that he enjoys, but I don't necessarily I would say he's like extroverted. I definitely lean more introverted.
Because it was interesting, because with the list of those rules, I was going through our kind of, not have the cell phones, be in the moment. That's good. But then, like, talk to a bunch of people. I'm like, oh no, I'm going to fail at that one. You know? I will fall flat on my face there. So I was going through my mind, like there are some qualities that are definitely very introverted from the standpoint of, you know, kind of going off on his own in these areas and the, you know, trying to be in the moment and all this sort of stuff. But at the same time, then there's some of the things seem very extroverted as well. Like, you know, photographing other people and having conversations and saying yes to so many things and all that. And so it is a very interesting mixture, because when you're reading through that stuff, I'm like, about half of that sounds like stuff I'd be good with. The other half, I don't think I'd want to do.
I think that depends on the mindset that you're taking with it, though, too, because even as an introvert, like, I could see forcing myself to interact with more people than I normally would on a walk like that, because of the stories that you garner, because of the information that you get, especially if you are doing an overlying project with it. I could definitely see where that alone can drive some pretty introverted individuals toward interacting with people that otherwise they wouldn't.
Yeah.
Plus, I mean, if you have a rule where you have to take a photograph of someone before 10 a.m. every day, that to me kind of reads like, okay, yeah, I have to force myself.
Yeah,
I have to have this rule because otherwise I won't. Otherwise I won't go and do this, and then I will later regret having not done it.
Yeah. So let's say that you find yourself in a grocery store, right? And then you happen to see, you know, a couple aisles down, someone you know. Are you going to go say hi to them, or are you going to just abandon your cart and run out of the store like I do?
It's funny you say that, because we were just over at over getting paint to redo the walls in here on this past weekend, and the person who was working or mixing the paint and doing all of that was actually happened to be someone that I knew from high school, that my girlfriend and I both knew. Totally did not recognize him whatsoever until she had pointed it out that, hey, this is so-and-so. And I didn't really interact with him like past a business point.
Yeah.
But afterwards I'm like, I had a million questions like, I wonder how he's doing and all of that. But I know I'll never go back in there knowing that he works there and like seek him out, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I think it really depends on who I see in the grocery store, how I would interact with them, if at all.
Yeah.
And most times, probably not at all. Because I've passed people in the grocery store that I know that are friends of my parents or whatever, and I interact with like around the campfire when we have them and that kind of deal. But when I'm on my own, unless I'm like coerced into interacting with them, I'm like, no, I'm okay. Like, yeah. Hi, I see you. Like, that's great. I don't need to have a 10-minute conversation.
Yeah. Good times. I hope you enjoyed our creative banter. You can learn more about Cody's work by visiting his website, codyschultz.com. And you can find my work at benhorn.com. For further discussion, join us at patreon.com/creativebanter. It's a place where we can interact with you, the listener. And although we greatly appreciate those who contribute by joining a tier, discussions are open to everyone, whether you're a paying member or not. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around next time.